This staircase was a disaster. It took a lot of work and several coats of mud to bring it back up to standard. And now look at it. My name is Jeff Rounds and I'm a general contractor. To be honest, there's many people that can do this better than I can, but my work does meet a professional standard. If you think you'd like to learn how to float mud like the professionals, feel free to watch this short video as I go over the basics of drywall repair. Let's start out getting familiar with our materials. This is a bag of 45. It's a type of joint compound that sets up in 45 minutes. The reason this is important is it allows people to put in a second coat the same day. These are especially useful for doing small repairs, but I use it even when I'm doing new construction. 45 is my base coat, and then I'll use a finish compound on top. 45 is a dry mix compound, but many of the compounds come in pre-mixed buckets. My favorite is the Plus 3. There are a few different brands of joint compounds and several different types. Many contractors use the all-purpose and they go straight to finish with the one compound. I decided to try several different products in this process and give A/B comparisons to each of them. My least favorite was this ultralight. Next, let's get familiar with the tools. Today I'll be using a 3-inch blade, a 10-inch blade, a 4-foot ladder, and a 12-inch mud pan. I'm also using a 4-inch blade that's not shown. For utility knife, I prefer this Milwaukee. It's sturdy and it has storage for 5 additional blades in this handle. A speed square is also handy to have on hand for scribing lines. And of course you'll need a tape measure and pencil. I'll need to drive some screws today, and I choose the 1 5/8" drywall screw. I use my DeWalt driver with the number 2 bit to sink them. For cutouts and trimming the edges of holes, I use my Multi-Master. And for cutting boards for reinforcement, I'll use my circular saw. There are 2 types of tape for patching drywall. One is a mesh and the other is a paper tape. The mesh is strictly for small repairs, whereas the paper tape is used for seams and corners. And now let's get into the work. Using my Multi-Master, I square off the edges of this hole that was made by the electrician to run his wires. Measuring in 2 places, I decide what size I'm going to make my patch piece. I normally make the patches slightly undersized so that I don't risk breaking the edges of the drywall patches I inserted. Transferring those measurements to a drywall scrap, I cut my piece to size. There's only lumber to set the screws in on one side of the opening, so using 1/2 inch OSB and drywall screws, I set reinforcement on the right side of the opening to make sure that my patch is going to be very smooth and flat. Because this is a small patch, I use the mesh tape for the seams. This is because the mesh tape tends to be a little bit thinner than the paper tape. I use the same process on the ceiling patch, and because there's no lumber inside this opening, I add reinforcement to 2 sides. Using my Multi-Master and the measurements that I've transferred, I cut the opening for the ceiling box, screw the drywall into place, and add the mesh tape. Now it's time for the patching. You can't see it, but I got about 2 inches of water in the bottom of that bucket, and I use this propeller paddle along with my dry mix compound to mix up a nice smooth batch of 45. Eventually I end up floating the skim coat over the entire surface of this staircase, but for the time being we're just going to concentrate on these patches. Also, while I've got the ladder out, I'm going to go ahead and tape the corners and get those as close as I can. It takes me 3 passes to get that corner looking fairly decent, but in my defense, the drywall underneath was in horrible shape. Also, as an experiment, I added a little dish soap to my finish compound and found that it made it very loose and it was really hard to work with. Ultimately, I'm happy with the final product, and I'm sure that this is going to be a comfortable home for some renter. If you found this video useful, please like and share.